we'll open the floor for some questions, and please introduce yourself. And I would like, please, if you have questions, it would be nice. Okay.
I'm Sheldon Shore. I'm an attorney here in Israel and a former student of Professor Barak at New York University in his Principles of the Legal System. And one of the things I learned over there was that when the British Mandate took over Palestine, they essentially installed British common law, except in two areas, in land law and in family law. The communities he spoke about were created during the time of the British Mandate. The idea was not to be paternalistic or liberal towards any group, but to be neutral and to stay out of the giving any preference to one group or another. I think, therefore, I totally reject your argument that there's liberalism or that the purpose of being nice to minorities is to somehow to be devious or to divide and conquer. I think they are simply neutral. The Israeli government lets Jews to be governed under the Jewish rabbinic law, whether it's liberal or not liberal, whatever the rules are, and similarly all the other communities, the 10 Christian communities and the Arab community. And I don't see any basis for your saying that there is somehow a devious plan involved. I think that is neutral with regard to all of the things. And I think that your argument ignores history.
The issue with history is much more complicated than what you stated, because all of this system is an Ottoman system. And the Ottoman system was this system of millets, this system of nations. And then the British came and they incorporated it. And then Israel was established and it incorporated it. Now, I guess we will both agree that the motives of the Ottomans are not the same as the motives of Israel, right? Even though the same things exist then and now. So one thing can exist and it can be even the same, but in terms of how it is perceived and how it is justified, it can be different. And this is what I was trying to say, that after Israel was established, there was a new set of justifications. Because if you are interested in history, I can add that when the Ottomans had this system of millets, it was partly based on Islamic Sharia. Ahl al-Kitab, have you heard of that concept? Al-Dhimmi, under the Quran, Jews and Christians, because they believe in a revealed book and they believe in God, are entitled to certain protection against the payment of a certain tax. But you would have the same thing. But is this the justification that exists today in Israel? I don't think so. I don't think that Sharia is guiding Israel today, but the same system does exist. And what I'm trying to say is that what exists today in Israel is different. I mean, how can you not consider the list of laws that I just put up? Is there a chief rabbinate for the Muslims? Is there a chief rabbinate for the Christians? Are there religious councils in any of the Arab villages and cities? Yes or no? It's obviously not. But then you would ask, why? How can they be considered to be the same? So what I was trying to say is that there is this descriptive theory, and this is what I'm offering. It's not necessarily degrading. It's not necessarily negative. I think it was also assisted by the Palestinian Arab community itself. As I tried to say in Milhim, who was arguing to maintain the religious norm? It wasn't the Jews, it was also the Arabs. But there were overlapping arguments on both sides, and it was maintained. It's considered to be something of a liberal. The Supreme Court, when it sits and it wants to intervene in what the rabbinical court is doing, it wouldn't feel as free when it wants to intervene in what the Greek Orthodox Church is doing. And I would be happy to hear that somebody would dismiss this argument. Thank you.
Yoav Peled from the Department of Political Science at Tel Aviv University. My question is to Professor Barak. There is a bill in the Knesset now intending to pass a new basic law that would declare Israel to be the homeland of the Jewish people and subject Israel's values as a Jewish state to its, subject Israel's values as a democratic state to its values as a Jewish state. This bill is aimed openly against the rulings of the Supreme Court that it is alleged have done the opposite, have subjected Israel's values as a Jewish state to its values as a democratic state, and in this way undermined the character of Israel as a Jewish state. Now, what you think about this law, I think, is quite obvious from your lecture, but I want to ask a theoretical question about a subject that you have written about in the past, and that is the subject of the unconstitutional constitutional amendment, or in our case, the unconstitutional basic law. You said in the past that the Supreme Court could declare a basic law unconstitutional if it violated Israel's values as a democratic or as a Jewish state. And I wonder if you think the Supreme Court should do this, should act in this way in relation to this law, because there's no question there will be appeals to the Supreme Court against the constitutionality of this basic law if it indeed passes.
Let me not answer your question. This is one of, you yourself said it may come to the court shortly. If, God forbid, it will become a statute, it may come. Once a judge, always a judge. So I prefer to be quiet. But I would like to say something about Michael's, because I too don't accept your idea. From my point of view, no, I'm not saying Jewish, Arab, from my point of view, looking at it from the point of view of the individual, there's no difference between the human rights of a Jewish individual and an Arab individual. Under Israeli law, a Jew can marry only an Arab. And it violates the human rights of the Jew, and it violates the human rights of the Arab. The jurisdiction of the rabbinical court violates human rights. The jurisdiction of Christian and Muslim court violate human rights. Every restriction of any one of these jurisdictions is to be praised for. We tried to limit the jurisdiction of the rabbinical court. It was unsuccessful. The attempt to limit, not to enlarge, to limit, you have mentioned it. The attempt to limit the jurisdiction of the Muslim court succeeded by putting it like the Jewish court, because in the past it was much, much larger. So what I'm saying is that any act of the state to protect human rights of Jews and Arabs is a good idea on an equal basis. Now, if I'm talking about the Jewish side of the equilibrium, any statute that will restrict the jurisdiction of the rabbinical courts is a liberal move and is to be favorable. Any move that will restrict the jurisdiction of the Sharia courts, I'm lucky that Kadi Natur is not here, is referable because it will limit, because it will extend human rights. I don't see a difference. The difference is in another area. The difference is that as far as when the Jews are concerned, in order to limit the jurisdiction of the rabbinical courts, you need parliament, and the minority in Israel are in the coalition. The minority of religious people, Haredim, are in the coalition, and in the coalition agreement, you cannot change the jurisdiction of the rabbinical courts. It's very difficult to change it. And therefore, until now, so let's see what will happen. I'm sure that if the situation as it is now will continue, we may find limitations of their jurisdiction. With the jurisdiction of the Arab courts, their jurisdiction was also limited. But if it is not limited, it's not because we view it as a liberal move not to limit them. No, I don't view it as a liberal move. But if it is not changed, it is because, again, you don't want to change the jurisdiction. The government doesn't want to change jurisdiction. A, because it doesn't want to quarrel with the Arab community. The Arab community don't want us to mingle into it. And Israel doesn't want to mingle with the Arab world. Sure. Nasser can abolish the rabbinical courts in Egypt, but I'm sure that Nasser would attack Israel if Israel would abolish. So it has nothing to do with liberalism. It has nothing to do with, my point is not to dispute your facts, it's to dispute your model, your paradigm. It has nothing to do with liberalism. Liberalism has not two views about it. We don't control enough, for example, the rabbinical, the religious communities. And I think it's wrong. A religious woman is discriminated in the religious communities. Took the buses in Jerusalem. And if similar discrimination will be in the Arabic community, it will be the same thing. It has to do not with liberalism, but with sheer power and politics.
Hello, my name is Elad Pines. I'm a student of philosophy at the Open University of Israel. And people consider me a conservative, but this might cause a surprise, that I actually view liberalism as not always saying yes, but actually saying no, that freedom must have limits. That when you give someone a finger, then the expression says, they will take your hand. Then my question is how we can explain to the Arab and Haredi community that by at times say no, that by maintaining the democracy of everybody, by maintaining the Jewish values, we're really trying to do the overall community of democracy and Jewish values, the overall good. So everybody's happy that you can't always say yes, but you got to say no for the greater good. So the state will be Jewish and democratic at the same time. And to the third speaker, and I agree with you as well. I think it's overly liberal at times. Yes, it is.
Yeah. I still defend my thesis, and I can give you a number of facts. I mean, you mentioned yourself that the equalization of the jurisdiction of Sharia and Christian courts happened in 2001, if I'm not mistaken. Whereas the jurisdiction of the rabbinical court was shrinked back in 1953. Now, how do you explain this gap? Paternity actions. They were considered to be within the exclusive jurisdiction of the Sharia courts back in the 1960s. In the 1970s, in the rabbinical courts, it was then perceived that this is a matter of evidence. It has nothing to do with religion to prove paternity. In the mid-1990s, things changed for the Sharia courts, and they would come after. And I can go on and on. You can refute my thesis by bringing one example by which liberalizing the jurisdiction first happened in the Arab community, and it was then followed by the rabbinical courts. There is no such example. It always happened first in the rabbinical courts, and then it was copied and pasted for the Christian and for the Sharia courts. This happens because what maintains that jurisdiction is a certain perception. You can call it being sensitive to the Arab world, to some kind of a collective sentiment. I perceive it of being in the genre of multiculturalism, of being tolerant to the minority. And I can give a number of other examples, even by Israeli Supreme Court justices, saying, well, we offer autonomy to the non-Jews, but it's not the same when it comes to the rabbinical courts. This happens to be history. And what I try to do is I explain it. I tend to give it a theoretical explanation. Some would consider to be part of being protective to the sensitivity. I consider that to be a kind of liberalism. Why not? There's a gentleman back there.
Jeremy Wolf, I'm from England. One of the interesting features of this lecture is it's focusing on religious groups. But I think one of the points, certainly from my personal perspective, that comes out of Michael's talk is that there's also, it may be a minority or a majority of secular people who may not have any religious affiliations. And certainly it strikes me that a major deficiency of the Israeli system and its religious foundations is that grouping, whether they've got Jewish or Muslim or Christian origins, is just totally not catered for at all. And I'm not sure, from my own personal angle, how consistent I view that to be with democratic values.
Well, just to say that I agree with you.
I would like a question for you, Wolf. You mentioned equality under law in the British system, and also mentioned some exceptions, like exceptional situations that the law sometimes has to find itself more flexible, like in circumcision situation for women, or what the situation, how you treat circumcision. You forbid it for women, but you allow it for men. So can you elaborate a little bit about the theoretical explanation for such exceptions?
Well, I recognize that there is a difficulty, and I'm not sure that I'm in a position to be a proper advocate for those who favor the acts in relation to women. I think that the justification is based on the fact that the consequences of male circumcision are much more limited than female circumcision. I mean, I don't know whether I have the medical knowledge to pontificate on this, but my understanding, at any rate, is that the act of circumcision is an act which has pain and discomfort. But once you recover from that pain and discomfort, there's no long-term effect. Indeed, so far as circumcision is concerned, it's argued that the result will be diametrically opposite to female circumcision, because there is a long-term effect, namely the object of the action is to make to maintain the these moral standards of the woman by removing any desire that she may have to have sexual relations. Whereas, as I understand it, some would argue, whether with justification or not, if there was any impact of male circumcision, it is to increase the satisfaction from sexual relations. So the one is a transient impact, the other is a lifelong one. But could I, if I may, just add a little bit about the English situation, because Aaron mentioned the fact that, of course, the Queen is the head of the Church of England. But like a lot of statements, when you come down to the practical position, is that although the Queen is the head of the Church of England, the Church of England's status within the English legal system is no better and no worse than any other religion. and they are all equally subject to the law. There are no exemptions made, and the idea that, which is at the root of what we are talking about, as I understand it, which is that in Israel, as Aaron so eloquently explained, the fact that this is a Jewish state has an impact upon what is meant by democracy in Israel. Well, so far as England is concerned, the fact that the established church is the Church of England has no impact directly on what is meant by a democratic state. And what we would say in England is that when a Muslim is before the courts really are not concerned that they are a Muslim insofar as their civil rights are concerned. If there is a question concerning what standards of behavior should be adopted in respect of matrimonial law is concerned, then the cultural background of the individual does become relevant because that can affect and provide an explanation for conduct which would not be available in the case of somebody of a different faith. And in fact, although the Queen has always said she's head of head of the Church of England, the Prince of Wales, who, for the normal tradition is followed, he becomes the next king, has seen himself as not only a protector of the Christian religion, but he likes to put it as the protector of religions. And he would say that his responsibilities are as great to the Muslim religion or the Jewish religion as it is to the Christian religion.
We don't have a state religion in Israel. The Jewish religion is not the religion of the state. So neither is the Islam the religion of the state. So in this respect, there may be a difference between us and the UK. We don't have a state religion here in Israel. The Jewish religion is not a state religion. What we do have is the values of the state of Israel as a Jewish state. Let me say also that my view, as Chaim Cohen's view, and I'm sure I'll be killed by half of the Israeli population or more, that the values of Israel as a Jewish state don't include the belief in God. Nothing to do. The values of Israel as a Jewish state are those particular values or universal values about the relationship between men and not between men and God in the sense of the belief in God. Oh, 50% of the people disagree with me, but that's my view, and I wrote about it. It's not something I hide.
I think Judaism is the established official state religion of the State of Israel. And I would want us to think and make a basic distinction between two things, and I think it's very important. One is, what do we think ideally about Israel, and what Israel is in fact, in reality. And I think we're kind of mixing of wishful thinking of seeing Israel as maybe Jewish, but Judaism is not an established religion, but not considering the fact that the chief rabbinate is established by law, the religious councils are established by law, you have a Sephardi and an Ashkenazi chief rabbi, and this multiplies in each of the major cities. I mean, this is something that exists in reality. This is not something we would want to think that it does not. Israel is still occupying certain sections of the West Bank. This is not democracy. I don't think that this is democracy, and you can call this a democracy. I can go on and on. We can think ideally of what Israel can be. And I happen to be maybe even very close to what Aaron Barak has said. But I'm speaking about reality. I'm speaking about how things are and where they are heading. The same Qa'dan case that was cited, there was an amendment to the law saying, well, you can still discriminate today on the social fabric of that person.
This is not what I say in the law.
No, I'm not, but this is what the law has said today, not on the basis of nationality, but you can say that this person is not accepted because of his or her social characteristics, and everybody knows what those can be, okay? This did not exist when Qa'dan was rendered, but now it exists. But this is our reality. This is where we are moving. This is where we are heading. We're not heading in this ideal of everyone is equal, everyone is happy, everybody is dancing hora in the streets every now and then. This is not the case.
Dorit, would you like to comment?
No, thank you. I'm very well represented here. Anyway, but I agree with the results, with the facts that Mikhail Karyani stated. But I also do not agree as to the reasons and the background. And it's a matter of political power, unfortunately. And all those decisions as to the rabbinical court and this legislation is part of the political power of those religious parties who are part of our coalitions, also part of the Knesset, and they are active. And one thing, and I had an opportunity to say it already, we discussed it a little, I agree with President Barak that it comes also, the attitude to the other courts, religious courts, comes out of political concerns which may be mistaken, not to touch the establishment, the Christian establishment, the Muslim establishment, because this might create a lot of tension and political tension. You can accept this concept or not, but I think it's really not a matter of liberalism.
I call that liberalism.
Well, if it's only a matter of how you determine it, so okay, let's call it.
This is what I'm calling it.
Respect.
Okay, we promise two more questions. We'll take them together. Short, please, and then we'll conclude. Please, you and then Daphne.
My name is Tony Castle, originally solicitor from Manchester, England, now attorney in Israel, and also teaching at law school. My question to all the members of the panel, or whoever of the panel wants to answer, is what does the panel think the recent groundbreaking decision in Haifa University that important Islam and Christian festivals should be official holidays at the university together with Jewish holidays. I would just add that I don't teach at Haifa University.
Daphne, please.
I'm glad that this question came before mine, and that my name is Daphne Efrat, and I'm from the Open University, a historian of Islamic history, scholar of Islamic history. I wish to promote your idea, Professor Karyani, your main thesis, by saying that it's not only a matter of a religion, Judaism or Jewish heritage that is established in the public sphere. It's a matter of domination. And this domination means that by nature or naturally it limits the very basic rights of other groups, of minority groups, both as individuals and as collectivities, to express their cultural the right. It limits the right, the very basic right, human right of expression, of cultural and identity expression. And this comes to light when you think about festivals and about what do you see in the public sphere? Who dominates the public sphere? What kind of place do you let other people have in this public sphere? The other point, which also relates to your thesis, is that treating minorities as communities, not as individuals, and the example you gave, I think, is very persuasive, that this kind of attitude or perception of other people by nature ignores or even neglect the rights of the individual, the human rights of the individual. It doesn't actually let the individual raise his voice or doesn't listen to the individual voice.
First of all, with regard to Haifa University, my mind boggles at the idea that the public holidays of all faiths who go to Haifa University shall be respected, because I just wonder when Haifa University will be open.
It's the major.
But at any rate, but subject to that, if Haifa University wants to recognize the war, I can't see any reason why it should not do so. That's speaking for myself. The other question, if I may say so, I think really puts a finger right on what is the real sensitivity here. Individual rights are very important. So are group rights. But the interests of the group and the interests of the individual have to be balanced sometimes. And that really goes back to the question you asked me about female circumcision. The problem about female circumcision in practical terms is that in sects who observe that, the woman loses fundamental rights that she has, which the courts in England would recognize, for her own expression, because of acts which usually take place at a time when she's not in a position to make any judgment about it. In the case of male circumcision, the impact isn't of that magnitude. And so I would say it's quite logical to make a distinction. And really what we are coming to on the question, as I see it, of the Muslim minority in Israel is possibly the fact that unless there are controls on democracy, which are the ones which would be created by the constitutional arrangements which Israel has developed, then you can have elected dictatorships with all the disadvantages of a dictatorship in a democracy, just as you can have them in a state which is not democratic. We know that there are many examples of people who are properly elected, but we wouldn't see them as Democrats, even though they get 95% of the votes. Because the democracy by itself, it doesn't have the qualities which we mean by a liberal democracy, unless the democracy is controlled by the protection of human rights of a minority.
Well, as far as Haifa, the same reply that Harry gave. I see no reason. If Haifa wants it, let them have it. As far as the questions you asked, Israel is a national state. And there is a majority and there is a minority. We should not discriminate the minority clearly. But it has to also, and there should be an expression for the minority. They should be able to express themselves. But the majority should also be allowed to express itself. England back. What is on the flag of England? It's a cross, or several crosses, or Swiss or other countries. Because there is a Christian majority. So you express the fact that you're a national state. It's different between a national state and the United States, which doesn't have this problem altogether. And maybe in the future, when we will have a new Middle East, we will not have it. But for the time being, Israel is a national state. It has a majority. This is the raison d'etre for its existence. And therefore, to protect it without discriminating the minority seems to me to be to fit the ideas of democracy. One point. The second point, I think Harry was right. You have to distinguish between individual rights and group rights. And when you talk about group rights, you may discriminate reversely in favor of a minority. So take my case, in which we decided that all the names of the roads in Tel Aviv, which before the decision were in English and Hebrew, should also be in Arabic. And we forced all the mutual municipalities to put it there. I was asked, are you going to force al-Fahim to put all the names in Hebrew? And my answer is no. I would not force the minority, I will force the majority. So it's a complicated matter. It's a very complicated matter. And I think the model Mikhail brought is too simple. Historically, it's too simple. Don't forget that historically, in the Ottoman period, the Jewish rabbinical court was a minority. And the Muslim was a majority. So historically, there is a problem. And also in terms of human rights, there is a problem. It's complicated. Human rights are a complicated issue. And there are situations in which you feel that there is discrimination, like the male and the female circumcision. There are other areas in which you feel it. So you have affirmative action. Is affirmative action for minorities? Is it discrimination? But it's justified. So I would be against discriminating Arabs and Jews, but I would be in favor of imposing on Tel Aviv something which I don't impose on al-Fahim.
Well, thank you. I think you all want to go home, and we need to finalize things. I just have a couple of quick comments, and we will end it there. My thesis, I hope it was so simple. I mean, I've been writing about it, and as I described, the whole is just getting bigger and bigger. It's much more complicated. I've just expressed here one side of it that happens to do with some Supreme Court judgments, but it can go on and on and on, and I can analyze some more Supreme Court judgments and so forth. But the basic issue, the issue of the majority and the minority, if you admit to the fact that minorities need more protection than the majority, then why is the Jewish majority in Israel working so hard to maintain its status as a majority? And you find that in all, in a large spectrum of laws. It's not just the law of return and its problematic nature. I mean, you said it gives the key to the Jew to come into Israel. What about me if I have a relative living in an Arab country? I am, as an Israeli citizen, denied the right, not him just or her coming in. I'm denied the right of being united with my relative in my home country. This does not happen in England. This does not happen in France. No. A French citizen cannot get united. A French and English citizen, just because he's a Jew? If I happen to be an Arab in Israel, I cannot be united because of my ethnicity. Yes, this is the law of return.
In Germany, you have to like a law of return.
Well, I cannot be united here in Israel because I'm an Arab, and Ahlon can be united because he's a Jew. And because we are both citizens. That's fine. That's fine. I'm not arguing that.
God that you didn't go for it.
Well, this is not the argument. The argument is that citizenship in Israel is divided only because of my ethnicity and his ethnicity, but we're both citizens of the same state. He's entitled to something and I'm not. This is a fact.
We're all Israelis.
Excuse me?
I think we all forget that we're all Israelis.
But I'm not arguing a normative argument. I'm just saying something which is descriptive. This is the fact. And going to the religious and the national, Yoav Peled wrote one of the most notable articles in Israel on what's the concept of citizenship. And he described citizenship for the Jews as being republican and for the Arabs being something which is individual. He's largely acclaimed for that. I happen to think that he is right when it comes to the national sphere. And the law of return plays a big role in that thesis. But when it comes to the religious spheres, things are different. I, as an Arab, am more considered as a group and less as an individual. And there is one other implication, and that was the subject of my talk during President Benish's conference, that there's a multicultural predicament. Once you would enforce the group right, you infringe or you undermine the individual rights of members. And this is how things play out.
Professor Barak said something. Jewish woman, Haredi woman, is discriminated.
But you don't protect the Jewish collectivity because of liberalism. You protect it because of necessity, politics, because of government coalitions, because of Wahrhaftig. But when you do not protect that institution because of liberalism, then liberalism would be devoted to the individual. But when you defend the collective identity out of liberalism, and I call toleration liberalism, then not much is left for the individual.
Professor Barak said something today which was very important. I think a lot of people missed it. He said, relationships between man and man. When I think in terms of being an Israeli, I don't think of him as an Arab and him as a Jew and whatever. I think in terms of an Israeli. I hope that when the case comes to court, that the judge doesn't look at a Muslim and a Jew. He looks at an Israeli. That is the mindset that we need here for everybody. That we realize we are Israelis together, without exception, without being in Ul-Fahim and without being in Tel Aviv. We are simply Israelis together. And the key to it is what Professor Barak said. It's between man and man.
Thank you very much.
We're putting too much emphasis on religion.
Okay, thank you very much for your remark. And thank you all for being here for a very, very exciting panel. Lord Harry Wolff, Professor Aaron Barak, and Mikhail Karyani. Thank you all.